Hey guys, Mike here with EBR, and this is the Aventon Soltera 2.5, meaning it's the third iteration of the very popular city commuter by Aventon, and this time around it got a new frame design, some better geo, and some upgraded components. So let's take a deep dive on the Soltera 2.5 here, and we'll talk about what those changes are, how they affect or translate to the actual ride of the bike, and where it shines, as well as if there's any areas to improve. All right, so the Soltera 2.5 is a Class 2 commuter, meaning we are capped at 20 miles an hour in both pedal assist and on throttle. Now, this bike is marketed or priced right now at $1,199, and it's also TUV Rhineland certified to UL 2849 standards, as well as the battery being 2271 UL certified as well. Now, they say this bike weighs 46 pounds. I did throw it up on the scale when I got it, and for me, it came very, very close. The way it sits right here is 45.5 pounds, and when you took out the battery, that went down to about 40 pounds flat. So pretty lightweight bike and a pretty sleek form factor altogether. Now, this frame is their newly designed frame, and this time around they went with double butted aluminum over last generation's single butted. And essentially what that means is all these contact points of high stress areas, like bottom brackets specifically, and these angled welding points, they've beefed up the aluminum a double layer to just reinforce those areas, keeping the center areas still light, but just beefing up the joint areas for the welds to just last longer and ultimately give more life to the bike's frame. Now, when they did that, they did improve some things like reach, and when you get on this bike, you quickly feel it's a little bit more upright and more relaxed than the previous generation, and I think that's a nod to the bike, what it's intended to do. It's a good commuter, it's a good city bike, and it doesn't need to be very aggressive or hunched over in a hybrid mountain bike or road bike position. Now, this comes in 3 frame sizes. This is the large here, but it also comes in small and medium, and that fits a wide range all the way from 5'1" up to 6'2". Now, this is 2 color available options here. We have the Baja, or kind of a fluorescent teal, I guess you would call that, but they also have a blacked out version that they call Midnight Black. And that one is kind of a really cool looking matte black with white and gray accented branding colors. So some geo numbers for this frame: we have a 32-inch step over height. We have a 42-inch wheelbase from rear hub to front hub or vice versa. We have 16 inches of reach up top, and the max payload is 300 pounds. Now, when it comes to wheels and tires, they went with an alloy 700C wheel set, and these do have Presta valves, which is something we don't see too often in the direct-to-consumer e-bike market, but it's very mainstream in most big brand bikes, especially the 700C tire size. So it's nice to see Presta valves going on this bike. Now, this is wrapped in 700 by 38 Kenda tires, and these are the Kenda, I believe, 1285s. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments, but they're essentially a city tire that's got a reflective stripe on the edge, kind of like a road bike tire, very little traction. You can tell this was designed mostly for very little rolling resistance, probably looking to edge out range numbers and battery life. Personally, I'd like to see a slightly wider tire, maybe 40, 42, maybe even 45. It looks like there's room for it here, and that would just give you a bigger footprint. But I do say that when I rode this bike, I never crashed on it, never slipped out in cornering, but I would think that in wet conditions, it would be in the back of my mind going around corners at speed. I would just want a little more traction on these tires. But all in all, they're very quiet, they're very fast, and they perform well. Now, when it comes to fenders and racks, there are none included with the bike, but they're available for optional purchases when you check out. And they do have mounting points for fenders, both front and back, as well as a set of bosses under the top tube and on the front side of the seat tube, as well as a front rack and rear rack. So you can really kit this out however you see fit. And finally, when it comes to lighting, they did equip this full front to back lighting for a true city bike. We have a front LED headlight, although they don't list the light lumen or lux. I can say it's pretty bright. It's going to be effective in both day and night to be seen or to see. Now, in the back, they do have tail lights that are built into these seat stays. They look very nice. It kind of gives it a premium look. And these act as your tail light when your headlight's on, but they also act as turn signals, which you can manage up front in the cockpit. Now, with all of that lighting, front headlight, rear tail light, and turn signals, For some reason, there's no brake light activation when you hit the brakes up there. I feel like that was a missed opportunity, but all in all, turn signals on a city bike is always a good thing, and front to back lighting is 2 thumbs up as well. All right, so when it comes to the powertrain or the muscle behind this bike, we're gonna start in the rear. We've got a 350 watt rear hub motor that pumps out 45 Newton meters of torque. Now, they don't list any peaking wattage, but I can say the 350 watts with the 45 Newton meters, it's definitely a good range for a bike that's limited to 20 miles an hour in that class 2 designation. You've got enough speed to get around town. You've got enough speed to ride with some speed. Essentially 20 miles an hour is a good pace on a bike. It's just not going to be punching those upper 20s and 30s without your assistance by your legs. Now, in the battery, we have a UL 2271 certified battery that has 345.6 watt hours, which is basically made up of 36 volts and 9.6 amp hours. Now, this battery can also be removed and secured in place. So if you want to take it off for off the bike charging or whatever, you can do so. I'll show you how that works now. So this bike comes with a set of keys. The key slot is on the opposite side of the frame. So I'll put that in, turn it, and you'll see this drop right there. And then there's one last lever to fully release it out of its place in the frame here. So again, this is UL 2271 certified, 345.6 watt hours of juice. And when it comes to range, they say this bike will get up to 46 miles. So of course I did a couple runs on my own just to see what I'd get with some real world numbers and mostly flat terrain, some slight rolling hills here and there. And on maximum PAS, so full bore, that class 2 limit, right around 20 miles an hour the whole way, I was able to pump out 27 miles, which is pretty good. And then on minimum PAS, bumping it down to the minimum assistance, just seeing how far it would go before it finally tapped out. And I was able to cover 48 miles, so actually surpassing their 46 mile estimate. All in all, that's really good. Now this battery and the whole bike has a warranty life of 2 years. All right, so when it comes to the componentry and just the component specs on here, so previously this was outfitted with mechanical disc brakes, but this time around we got hydraulic disc brakes. And hydraulic disc brakes, now I should give you some preface to this. When I got this bike for testing, I still had the Soltera 2.5, which is last generation. And I thought to myself, don't ride it, the new one, jump on the old one, get a feel for it, remember what it feels like. That way I wanted to see if I would feel any new improvements on this bike. And I noticed 2 quick things. The geo, because of the shorter reach up top with that riser bar, you just have a nice upright, comfortable position. And then the other one was the braking. Now, the mechanical brakes that the previous model had, they were mechanical disc brakes, so cable actuated. They worked well, but when you pull cable, you have cable tension. There's just some delay between the time you start pulling and when the brakes start to actually stop. And I found that as soon as I got on this bike, the first time I hit the brakes after being used to the cable tension, I quickly stopped because hydraulic disc brakes are just hard to beat. They feel really good. They have very good stopping power, and that was a super good upgrade on this bike. Now, when it comes to drivetrains, we have a 7-speed Shimano setup. Now in the back here, it's a 7-speed Shimano tourney derailleur, and it has a 14 to 28 tooth rear cassette, which is also Shimano. Now when it comes to the chainring, we got a 48 tooth chainring. Now I think 48 tooth up front made into this 14 to 28. It's a really solid range. It's not super wide or crazy, but it's able to give you all the power you're gonna need, especially in that 0 to 20 mile an hour range. Now you can go past 20 miles an hour on this bike, even with this setup of chain and cassette. But again, because the bike's pedal assisted limited to 20, you're gonna have to do more work to get past 20 miles an hour. But the gear range on this is spot on, I'd say. Now the cranks are 170 millimeter cranks, and we have flat plastic pedals with some studs and reflectors for visibility when you're in town riding. Now up top, we do have Aventon's branded saddle. I'll show you that. So this is Aventon's branded saddle. The previous generation had a Cell Royale saddle, and this time around they went with an Aventon branded saddle. It feels just as good to me. I noticed really no difference at all. And it's got a quick release collar for adjusting the seat post, where you have about 6 inches of adjustability to kind of just help you dial in that fit for you. Now up front and in the rear, there's no suspension on this bike. This is a fully rigid aluminum frame. Now I found that to kind of create a little more comfort when you have a rigid frame, doing things like airing down tires a couple PSI can go a long way in just soaking up tiny vibrations on the road. And it worked well in this bike. But one caveat is with 38C tires, not a ton of volume for you to be able to air down much. But if you went with a 40, 42, something like that, you'd have a little bit more room to air down more. But all in all, it's super comfortable to ride. And if you air down a bit, it just gets even better. Now up here in the cockpit, we've got a 620 millimeter alloy bar with about, I'm gonna guess on this, around a 25 millimeter rise to it, and a little bit, tiny bit of a sweep back, maybe a degree or two. On both ends, we have Aventon branded rubber ergonomic lock-on grips, which I always like seeing lock-ons because they don't spin and pull away over time. And on both ends, we also have Tektro disc brake levers. Over here on the left side, we have a push throttle along with your PAS control pad, and that will manage everything in your display. Speaking of the display, not only is this full color, but this also has app connectivity. So let's deep dive into both of those now. All right, so this is gonna be the home screen on the Aventon Soltera 2.5. It's a nice color display, and this has a little Aventon logo up top. That simply indicates that it's paired to my phone right now. If that was not there, it just means you're not paired. In the top right corner, we have a battery bar meter, a 5-bar meter, and a numerical number. So right now it's at 95% battery remaining. In the center, we have the speed in miles per hour that we can change to kilometers. I'll show you in just a second. Right down here in the bottom left, we have our plus and minus for our PAS levels. So your assistance is in 4 levels: Eco, Tour, Sport, and Turbo. Or you can just ride the bike and it's off with no pedal assistance at all. And at 45 pounds, it's a pretty easy bike to pedal around town. Even if you ran out of battery, you could get home on this, no problem. In the bottom right, we have some data screens that are actually scrollable with different information. The default here is the odometer. The bike has 144 miles and the total time right around 11 hours. Now, if you want to see other data screens, you just tap the power button and you'll see the average speed is 13.5 and the max speed is 29.2. Now, keep in mind that max speed goes past the class 2 limits of the bike, so that was probably one of us riding it downhill and using some leg effort as well. Now, tap it again and you'll get some CO2 reduction stats and some burned tree saved stats as well. So it says right now we've reduced CO2 emissions by about 40 kilograms and saved 3.2 trees. To go one more tap will take us back to the original default screen of odometer and time. Now, if you want to do some advanced settings or just change a couple basic things, you can do that here in the display by holding the plus and minus. And that takes us to the main menu of the advanced settings. So first off, you can clear trip data if you want to reset it. You can change your screen brightness on level 1 to 5. You can change your unit right here between kilometers per hour and miles per hour. Here is your system info, things like version number, firmware number, software numbers, things like that. And then here is where you connect to the app. You'll get a QR code. You'll scan that when you open the app, and that will pair the bike to your phone and allow you to kind of name it, add a picture, and have all your details. And now to get out of this, we will, like it says, back is the power button. You just tap it. And the back arrow to leave the advanced settings takes us back to the default home screen. But now let's go into the app and talk about how it pairs and what you can do in the Aventon app. All right, so this is the home screen of the Aventon app. And when you pair the bike using that QR code I just showed you, it's gonna just load up a picture of the bike and have the name of it. So it says Soltera 2.5. Up here, this little indicator just means you are paired with Bluetooth to the bike. And again, you have your basic data like ride time and odometer. And you can turn on the light for the bike if you want to, and then turn it back off here. You can go into more settings, and that's going to give you settings that you would use much like the display advanced settings. You can name the bike or give it a nickname. You can change the screen brightness, how long it takes the bike to power off when you stop using it, the speed limit. Although it lets you hit buttons left or right of 20 miles an hour, the bike is capped at 20 miles an hour. And then here is your metric units again. And your assist level you can change through the app if you wanted to, but you can always do it right here on the handlebar as well. And you can unpair if you ever want to sell the bike or unpair it for whatever reason you need to. So we'll go back, and here is another battery bar indicator as well as your PAS. You can change here if you want to. And a quick read of the display as well. Those data screens I showed you earlier. If you hit this button, you can get a list of dealers in your local area, and help will take you to support page for Aventon. Now, if you want to go into here, it'll show all your recorded rides. We haven't been using the app to record the rides, but if you want to record a ride, you just hit go, and then that will say, we'll ask for permission to use your location, and that looks good. And that will take us to the GPS mapping on the bike, and this will record your ride, where you go, how fast you go, all this data like riding time, average speed, max speed, how far you went, and how long it took. And you just hit start to get that going. Now to back out of that, you just hit the back button, go to discover. And this is kind of a cool thing that Aventon does. It's like a social aspect. People post every single day. These are actually all from today. And it's just people sharing their rides, how far they went, kind of a bragging board if you want to, or maybe you can just connect with people in your area. Over here, the last tab is just going to be your profile. It'll give you some awards for doing things. It'll allow you to change your name. One cool feature here is you can connect your Strava account to this bike, which is very neat. And you can also, again, get dealers in your area, change the password for the bike, pair the bike, and then optimized track is going to be, if you're having any issues with the ride tracking, you can go in there and it'll walk you through a calibration process to just kind of optimize the tracking of the bike on the ride. But again, that's really only if you're having issues with it. And then here you can clear the cache. You can go into settings, and the only setting in the app is just going to be delete your account. And then about is just going to be the version of the app. And that wraps up the app on the Aventon Soltera 2.5. It's useful, it's good looking, and I've had no buggy issues with it. So all in all, the app is a pretty solid addition to the bike, especially at this $11.99 price point. All right, guys, we're out here on the Soltera 2.5. Now, I made it a point to ride the last generation's Soltera 0.2 for quite a bit before I hopped on this for the first time, because I wanted to see if there was any noticeable differences. And when I got on this bike, I immediately noticed the geo changes they made. While they are slight, you know, slightly shorter reach and slightly shorter top tube, things like that, those little changes brought the riding position just a bit more upright and relaxed and kind of just more comfortable, which previously was just a little bit more aggressive and down low. And for some, that'd be good. But for me, I really like this new relaxed upright geometry. It just gives the bike a more casual, easy, comfortable way to ride the bike. The other thing I noticed immediately was the braking power. So the last version had mechanical disc brakes, which are good and powerful, but not like hydraulic disc brakes. There's just a big difference, and you really do feel these brakes immediately. So these are Tektro, which is a nice big name brand with lots of support and parts available if you ever have to have service done. I always like seeing big name brands on components for that very reason. On your left, thank you. And they have 180 millimeter rotors, 2-piston calipers, and they stop really well. So I'm gonna get up to 20 and just feel the brakes. See how they stop. All right, 3, 2, 1. So they stop really good, and I actually had to feather them a little bit because if you guys notice the tires on here, they're 700 by 38C, and they have kind of a slick tread pattern, right? So there's no actual like prominent tread, I should say. There's some slight lines in there, but it's nothing that's really gonna get any bite or traction when you really need it. It's going to be great for smooth, flat, dry trails like this, but I'd like to see something maybe in a 40, 42 with some traction, some mild knobbies, smooth center. That would give you speed on these dry flats with some raised knobbies on the outer edges. Then you'd have some traction in corners and a little bit more peace of mind. Now this corner's fine on dry asphalt. I would just be concerned, excuse me, Quail. I would just be concerned about cornering in wet conditions at speed. Nothing unsafe, but just, you know, your casual 15 miles an hour going around a corner on a wet path might be kind of sketchy with the 38Cs. However, the good news is that's super easy to just swap out to something you prefer. Now, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but the motor, from what I can tell so far, appears to be the same motor as the Soltera 0.2 because it feels very similar and sounds very similar. And when I say sounds, this motor does have some motor noise to it. It's not silent. It's not overbearingly loud, but it's kind of that middle of the road e-bike typical noise you'd expect to hear. Honestly, when you're going at low speeds, it's very easy to hear it. But when you get going 15, 20 like I am right now, the wind in my ears actually is all I hear besides myself talking. It's not something that's going to turn heads, that's for sure. Excuse me. The torque sensor the motor has a torque sensor, which is just going to, when you use the pedal assistance, a torque sensor is just going to give you a slightly more natural pedal feel. It's going to feel less punchy and pushy like a cadence sensor might feel. It's just going to feel a little bit more natural and intuitive, which is always nice, especially at a bike at this price point. Torque sensor is always nice to see. Comfort-wise, I mean, aside from the geometry being upright and more relaxed and comfortable, the saddle, grips, all the contact points feel solid. No pain, no super hard surfaces. Nothing I'd want to feel like I needed to swap out at all. And another perk on this is just kind of front to back lighting. So we've got a headlight, a tail light integrated into the seat stays, and then turn signals, which you just activate by the little directional pad here that you operate your PAS. If you just hit the left button or right button, you get on your display. It's probably hard to see because it's blue with a black background, but the turn signal illuminates on the display. Hit it again, it turns it off. So full lighting front to back, plus mounting points for fenders and racks. And 2 more mounting points inside the frame triangle. So you've got lots of options for your gear every day, which is really nice as well. As far as how it feels on the road, I mean, those 38C tires I talked about, while they may not be the most grippy tires, they're very fast rolling, quiet, and don't really have any rolling resistance. So you just feel like you're kind of floating down the road on this bike. It handles well. It's very smooth. It kind of glides. To me, that's a sign of a fun little commuter. You're going to zip around. It's going to feel good. But keep in mind, this does have a limit to speed of 20 miles an hour, and you cannot unlock that to 28. So for those of you looking for a true Class 2 commuter or city bike, this is right up your alley. Speaking of that, let's test this throttle and see how long it takes for this 350 watt motor to reach 20. So 3, 2, 1. So kind of a reserve start, but we're already at 10 miles an hour. 15, type 17. And right at 20. So certainly not like a speed demon, but I'd say it's pretty much in line with what you'd expect on a Class 2 city bike. It's got the power you're going to need to get from A to B. And even on the hill like that, it feels fine coming up the hill. It doesn't feel like it's struggling. It's just not going to be super top end fast, you know, hitting those upper speed limits upwards of 30 miles an hour. And in my local area here on this path where I would do the majority of the riding, these are restricted to 20 miles an hour anyway. And most jurisdictions are going to things like that, or at least hinting at them. So for a Class 2 e-bike, this kind of sleek city bike, it's going to work well regardless of whether you're riding this, you know, in your local town paths like I am now, or commuting in and out of town. It's just going to be a good fit. But let's go back and talk to Ben, get his thoughts on this bike from a bike mechanic's perspective, on the things he likes and maybe doesn't like, and we'll go from there. All right, guys, I'm going to take a break from kind of talking about this bike and hand the reins over to Ben. He's our in-house mechanic. He's got 20 years wrenching on bikes and some really good insights on things he likes about some of the bikes we bring in and some things he would improve. We just run each one by him and let him do his thing. Ben, I'm going to let you start, and I'm going to get out of your way, but I want to say thank you to Feedback Sports. They provided us with some of their toolkits and some of their racks, specifically their Pro HD aluminum rack. It's very durable and stable, even on some of these big, heavy e-bikes. I just really like using them. And if you have an interest in some of these products, I will put a link down in the description so you can check out what they have. Ben, just kick it off with what you like about the Soltera 2.5.
All right, thanks, Mike. It's a very simple bike. It's a pretty short list just because of the simplicity of this nice little cruiser. First things first, I will point out the bolt-on front wheel, which typically I'm not a big fan of because it can take a little longer, and then additional tools if you have to change the flat tire, replace the inner tube or the rotor or something like this. However, a bike like this looks like it's an urban commuter, so you're going to ride this around town. I look at a bolt-on wheel as kind of a theft deterrent, or make it harder to steal a wheel or a bike frame. So I like that on this bike. It's a really nice touch. The fork I like for a couple of reasons. One, because it's just a rigid fork, not an inexpensive, flexible suspension fork that doesn't work well. So a nice, rigid, lightweight fork, but also a tapered steer tube, which means that it's a 1.5 inch diameter at the bottom and a 1 1/8 at the top. That just means that the front end of this bike will feel really stiff and stable and strong, not a lot of flex, which I like on a bike like this. I think that's great. Also, the stem on this bike is a standard mountain bike stem, is what I would refer to it as. So A, that means you can get replacement parts. B, you can go get a different stem that might be longer or taller in the ride, something if you want a different comfort fit. The other part about that is some bikes will come with an adjustable stem. An adjustable stem can be nice because it will accommodate more riders, different body heights, etc. However, it does seem common that stems that are adjustable will also have a lot of flex. So you get into the corners, or you're accelerating, or even standing up off the seat and pedaling hard up a hill, and they'll flex a little bit. So I like how the stem, the steer tube, and the wheel all play into a nice solid front end. I will point out how much I like a 7-speed drivetrain. This is a Shimano 7-speed drivetrain. The reason I like a 7-speed is because 7 speeds means there is more steel in both the freewheel and in the chain. So as a rider, that just means it won't wear out as quickly. You'll get more miles, probably less time in the bike shop getting adjustments. So the more steel, the better in some cases. And I think in this case, that is. It's also got a zinc coated chain, which I like because it's very resistant to corrosion. Rust doesn't really happen to get on zinc. It also holds the chain lube a little bit better than a standard steel chain, so I like that. That's a real nice touch, Mike. Those are the things that I like about this bike.
Nice. And what kind of things would you improve on a bike like the Soltera 2.5?
Great question. You know, and the first one I'll note is comparing it to last year's bike. Last year's bike had a set of tires with more rubber. It was a thicker rubber. So as a rider, you're going to feel a little bit more compliancy between the bike and the road, but secondly, longer life. See, on the brake test with this bike, we actually have got a couple of skid mark spots on this tire, and if it continues like that, it's just going to wear out pretty darn quick. So a thicker tire with more rubber, that's going to last longer and feel better on the ride. So thicker tires are something similar to last year. The pedals on this are plastic, which is fine because they've got a nice wide standing platform. However, plastic pedals are plastic pedals. If the bike falls over, the rider crashes, it's in transportation somehow, plastic can crack and break, which means you might just have to replace these sooner than if you had aluminum pedals. So my suggestion to consider with Aventon on this one would be some aluminum body pedals, and maybe even a two-piece aluminum chainring. What that'll do for you as a rider means that it's going to be easier to replace that chainring as time goes on and you wear it out, or maybe if this thin stamped steel one bends, the aluminum one can be replaced a little easier. So to me, it's just a matter of durability on that one, and I'm just not a real big fan of stamped steel chain rings. On that same note with the bottom bracket, this has what's referred to as a square taper bottom bracket spindle. Man, those things were used clear back in the early 1990s. That's like 30 or 40 years ago. So it's time to step up to an oversized, stronger bottom bracket spindle, especially on a bike like this that's built to go fast and feel strong. I think that would be a really nice upgrade. A couple last things. With this 350 watt motor, there's not a lot of torque in the hub. Okay, there are braking forces at the back wheel as well. My point here is that these have really thick 12 gauge spokes, and I don't think that they're necessary. You could get away with a 14 or 15 gauge spoke, and what that will do for you as a rider is it'll make the wheels lighter. So your acceleration will be easier, your braking forces will feel a little bit more responsive. And to me, a thinner spoke may even cost a little bit less in manufacturing, so that may bring the price down. I could be wrong on that, but I do think that it would be a better upgrade for this bike. The handlebars on this bike in particular are 650 millimeters wide, right here to here. While I was riding this, it felt, and this isn't really a mechanical thing, it's a ride preference thing, but it felt like the bars were really narrow for something that's with this long of a wheelbase and this high of a center of gravity. So my suggestion would be to Aventon, send this thing out of the factory with a 700 millimeter handlebar. So what that's going to do is accommodate riders who've got more broad shoulders or just prefer a wider handlebar. And then for somebody that doesn't, they can always cut them down. All right, you can never make a handlebar longer, but you can always cut it down. So if from manufacturing they set this thing up with something wider, I think that would accommodate more riders. The last thing that I'll touch on is the valves on this. These are thinner or narrow. They're called Presta valves. It's very common and pretty much the only valve you're going to see on any road bike and really high-end mountain bike. However, I think that somebody that's going to consider this bike, the general customer base, are going to be more familiar with what's referred to as a Schrader valve. A Schrader valve is the same kind of air valve you have on your car. Any vehicle, every vehicle, they've got them. You can roll up to the gas station, boom, you can just pop that head on there, pump up your tires, good to go. And I think that some riders will question how to pump this up. maybe need to buy another pump, maybe have to buy an adapter. So out of the factory, I think if this came with some Schrader valves, it would just make it easier for riders to pump their tires up. Otherwise, I tell you, for the price, it sure is a nice little bike.
Nice, Ben. Once again, thank you for your time, and we will bring you our next bike when we get it.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, guys, so there you have it, the new Aventon Soltera 2.5, the third iteration to this very popular bike, and it's popular for good reason. So they say this is a city bike, but I really think it could do a little bit of everything. You can commute in this, you can ride downtown in this, but you can also just go out on the weekends in your local neighborhoods on bike paths with this, or you could really go all out, throw carbon wheels on it, carbon handlebar on it, and make it just a really cool flat bar gravel bike. It really has a lot of potential to do what you want with it, and at just $11.99, it's a pretty strong value proposition. Plus, this new generation has better frame design and beefier frame with a double-butted aluminum over single last time, and now has hydraulic disc brakes. And in my opinion, the Geo now is much more upright and relaxed and comfortable, which is always a good thing on a bike that's not meant for pure performance. So if I missed anything or you have any questions about the Soltera 2.5, drop them down below. I try to answer everybody's questions. And if you haven't done so already, consider liking and subscribing. If you're looking for an e-bike and you want some really detailed, in-depth reviews of e-bikes, give us some love and hit that like and subscribe button. And until the next review, I'll see you guys out on the trail.